Ambassador Rattray, Chair of the Permanent Memorial Committee, Ms. Jensen, Director of the UNESCO Liaison Office in New York, Dr. Weaver, distinguished panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. And it is a great honor for me to be able to welcome you to the United Nations tonight. My name is Maher Nasser. I'm the acting head of the Department of Public Information at the United Nations. Since 2008, the department has managed the annual program of commemorative activities in observance of the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. The day is observed on the 25th of March each year, but the program of activities continues throughout the year, and in 2014 has included a film festival. Today's roundtable, it's not round, but it's round table, figuratively.
Better than being square.
Yes. On the representation of slavery in cinema concludes this year's festival. The UN Slavery Remembrance Program, which includes an educational component, aims to raise awareness about the causes, consequences, and lessons of the transatlantic slave trade and to communicate the dangers of racism and prejudice today. Few art forms have the mobilizing power that cinema does, and we have found that films serve as powerful educational tools. With the stage set, now set, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Harold Weaver. Dr. Weaver is the founding chair of the African Studies at Rutgers University. In 1972, he became the first professor to offer a course on Paul Robeson and his work. Dr. Weaver is the principal curator of the Black Film Project, the China Film Project, and a non-resident fellow at the DuPont Research Institute, Harvard University. Dr. Weaver also participated in the Tanzania seminar, during which he made a presentation, which we asked him to share with us today. Dr. Weaver, over to you.
Thank you. Ambassador Rattray and distinguished friends and family committed to human rights and justice, the Black Film Project is honored and happy to be with you this evening as a part of the UN program of the remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic trade. Indeed, a crime against humanity. We're looking forward to active involvement in the 2015-2024 decade for people of African descent. Our congratulations also go out to UNESCO on the 20th anniversary of the UNESCO Slave Route Project under the dynamic leadership of Ali Musa, to whom we're grateful for his recruiting the Black Film Project and helping to implement and to plan the 2006 Roundtable at the Zanzibar International Film Festival. Finally, our thanks to the UN's Department of Public Information and its collaborators for organizing this roundtable on film and slavery. Indeed, much has happened in the cinematic treatment of chattel slavery in the Americas since our roundtable in Zanzibar in 2006. And of course, you have seen clips from some of those cinematic works. But who could have guessed that in 2014, a film based on a slave narrative would win the Academy Award as the best film of the year? In 2007, 1 year after our roundtable, our UNESCO-appointed jury at the Zanzibar International Film Festival awarded 500 years later the prize as the best film on slavery that was screened at ZIF. It is a fact-filled documentary that could serve as a model to future filmmakers daring to tackle a sweeping approach to historical phenomena over the centuries. And other films have come along, some of which you screened at the series here at the UN. My questions to myself in preparing my presentation this evening: what would be useful for me to share tonight at this educational event leading into 2015 as the UN declared International Decade for People of African Descent? What presentation might be most useful for the UN program on the remembrance of the victims of slavery and the slave trade? What might best enlighten our highly educated audience? Historically, how have African Americans stereotypically been portrayed in film, including images of negative, inferior behavior as a justification for chattel slavery, as a justification for chattel slavery, and as a demonization of the post-slavery Reconstruction. This is just what director Marlon Riggs does in Ethnic Notions, a clip I would like to screen this evening. The genius filmmaker Marlon Riggs has done a brilliant cinematic documentation of the various cultural institutions, including film. Remember, it wasn't We Damned Film, but it's all the cultural industries that were portraying Africans in a very negative way, whether in Africa or at home or in the States. His was not merely a description, but it was an analysis, an approach too often neglected in both fiction and nonfiction films. Riggs is more comprehensive in complementing film historian Donald Bogle's categorization of African Americans in Hollywood films: Toms, Coons, Mammies, Mulattoes, and Bucks. Now for Riggs, he takes it further, and I'll just mention two of his categories. One, he talks about the loyal Uncle Toms, the faithful, the happy, the docile, the loyal, the servile. They are contented with enslavement of Africans according to the cultural industries throughout. Contented with enslavement. So it's a justification. They were happy. If the happy darkies, let's not do anything about it. And the second category that I want to mention, that he mentions, is the carefree Sambos. Irresponsible, definitely not ready for emancipation from enslavement during the post-slavery Reconstruction era. And this occurred simultaneously with the desire to implement Reconstruction in a much better way. He has other categories which I will skip over, but I wanted to mention the two, the loyal Toms and the carefree Sambos, because they tie in with our theme of in this slavery discussion. So here is a very short clip from this brilliant non-narrative film, Ethnic Notions. And what it does, it shows the various cultural images that have been projected historically over a period of time by mainstream. Can we have that clip, please?
A is for Auntie, the oldest of all. She rocks all us children to sleep in her shawl. D is for Daniel, who tends to the door. He took care of Massa way back for the war. F is for Felix, who won't do no work. He's lazy and shiftless and ready to shirk. Z is for Zonia, chunky and small. But here come the missus, so I guess it's them all.
Listen, Mammy, there ain't no way to wash clothes. What you all need is rhythm.
What do you all mean, rhythm?
I'll show you what I mean.
The mammy, the pickaninny, the coon, the sambo, the uncle. Well into the middle of the 20th century, these were some of the most popular depictions of black Americans.
Rubbly up dub. She rubbed and rubbed the knuckles right on down to the nub, yeah.
By 1941, when this cartoon was made, images like these permeated American culture.
I think one of the lessons that we can draw from Riggs's film is that these were not images out there by chance. They were predetermined to provide disinformation, not just merely misinformation. So the cultural industries, including cinema, have done this since the beginning of cinema. Now, then a change occurred. My own feeling that as a result of the freedom movements of the 1950s and 1960s in Africa, in the USA, and in the Caribbean, especially the Cuban Revolution, African descendant filmmakers emerged to use their new decision-making positions as directors and producers to reverse the totally negative cinematic images that you've seen depicted on the screen. That is, to begin to set the cinematic record straight. Haile, Ousmane Sembène, Melvin Van Peebles, Sarah Maldoror, Med Hondo, Sergio Hiral, Yuzan Palsy, Spike Lee, Raoul Peck, Gordon Parks, and others were among the female and male directors pioneering the precarious way in demonstrating that liberation and other human aspirations of black folks around the world could be legitimate cinematic concerns, subjects, themes in narrative films. For this short presentation today, adapted to our time constraints, we present brief excerpts from two other films in which African descendant filmmakers deliberately set out to challenge the plantation genre norm, the Hollywood plantation genre norm. Which laid the groundwork for 12 Years a Slave in 2013. Now, some of us here tonight might not have screened these striking, startling films that I'm about to show excerpts of because of the way our domestic distribution system works. And the two films that I want to screen clips from, one is called El Otro Francisco. Has anyone heard of that film? Okay. The Other Francisco, 1974. not 2014, 1974. And a clip from a film made in 1984, 30 years ago, called The Odyssey of Solomon Northrop, 12 Years a Slave. How many of you have seen that film? Great. How many saw it before 12 Years a Slave? You are rare human beings. Yes, friends, you did hear me correctly. A film involving iconic Renaissance man Gordon Parks as director and my former student at Rutgers, Avery Brooks, as the star, came out in 1984, 30 years ago. But first, let's go back to the film 40 years ago, El Otro Francisco, The Other Francisco. Where do you think it was made? In Cuba. Cuba was so far ahead of Hollywood in making films. In fact, as you probably know, one of the first cultural acts that Fidel established, in addition to education and health, was cinema. And this is from a trilogy that Sergio Giral made. So, Afro-Cuban filmmaker Sergio Giral draws upon a literal portrayal of the first abolitionist novel in the Americas, not Uncle Tom's Cabin, but Francisco, written a few years before the U.S. publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, in a parallel docudrama format. In contrast to the romantic depiction of life in the novel, the filmmaker vividly presents some of the realities of chattel plantation slavery. It's very important to remember when you speak of slavery in the Americas, don't forget the word chattel, because it was unlike any slavery that existed anywhere in the world. So the realities of chattel plantation slavery in Cuba in the 19th century. Dehumanization by rape by the white masters. And I must warn you, there's a rape scene in this film. There is a rape scene in this clip. Cruelty, overwork of the enslaved field workers, even pregnant women, under demanding conditions. At the same time, this film, 1974, unlike other films that had been made up until that time and even afterwards, it presents the various ways that enslaved human beings resisted those conditions, to revolt, to destroy, to disrupt, and to disorient. Murder, arson, escape, suicide, infanticide, and of course, as we see in the clip, sabotage. So the realities of escape and rebellion are graphically and consistently in the minds and hearts of the enslaved Africans as they existed on the Cuban sugar plantations. The cruelties to enslaved Africans, children, women, and men, are depicted. Beatings, the dogs, the terrifying bite and intimidate. That didn't start with Birmingham. And tight control of behavior and movement. So notice in this brief clip how we're about to screen, the filmmaker intercuts between Dorothea's unsuccessful resistance to rape simultaneously with the field hands' sabotage of the sugar plantation. This film was to impact on various films made afterwards, including filmmakers who may be present this evening. It is a film that Hollywood dared not make or distribute until the second decade of the 21st century.
Francisco y Dorotea responden al marco romántico en que el autor los sitúa. Pero las verdaderas condiciones del amor en la esclavitud eran otras. Las relaciones amoroso-sexuales de los esclavos estaban limitadas por el desequilibrio numérico entre ambos sexos. Las pocas esclavas del ingenio eran utilizadas para el disfrute de los peones blancos o apareadas con otros esclavos para la reproducción. La esclava embarazada estaba obligada a promediar 400 arrobas de caña diarias hasta el 9º mes de gestación, y al igual que los hombres, no estaba exenta de castigos. La mortalidad infantil en los ingenios, que se acercaba a un 100%, hacía imposible aumentar la fuerza de trabajo por medio de la reproducción natural de sus negras. De aquí que una repulsión de las esclavas a tener hijos que vivieran en iguales condiciones de explotación que ellas, las llevara a evitarlos. Toda forma de sentimiento humano le estaba vedado al negro en las condiciones de la esclavitud.
This film, part of a trilogy, remains for me one of the most important and informative films decolonizing history in the Americas. So, the next film clips are from Gordon Parks's Solomon Northrop's Odyssey, 12 Years a Slave, made 30 years ago in 1984, but unfortunately never mentioned that I have seen in mainstream media when discussing the 2013 12 Years a Slave. This groundbreaking USA-made TV film was based on the memoir, and this is the whole title of the memoir, 12 Years a Slave, narrative of Solomon Northrop, a citizen of New York, kidnapped in Washington City, we now call Washington, D.C., in 1841, and rescued in 1853 from a cotton plantation near the Red River in Louisiana. It was shown 30 years ago on public television, repeated once on American Playhouse, and then disappeared, until it reappeared later on home video. It's my own pleasure to screen this film for the first time in 1985, not in the U.S., but in France at the Amiens International Film Festival in the presence of its director. Had it been made and distributed by the Hollywood film industry, this film would have been one of the first Hollywood films to deal honestly with chattel slavery in the U.S. It seems that filmmaker Gordon Parks was in agreement with abolitionist Frederick Douglass in his reaction to the book when it came out. And what he said, what Douglass said about Solomon's memoirs, 12 Years a Slave, think of it. For 30 years a man, with all man's hopes and fears and aspirations, with a wife and children to call him by the endearing names of husband and father, with a home, humble it may be, but still a home. Then for 12 years, a thing, a chattel person, classed with mules and horses. Oh, it is terrible. It chills the blood to think that such are. So the two clips I would like for us to take a look at is, in contrast to many of the Hollywood films which show black families as dysfunctional, this film shows a functional black family, number one. And two, we see in the clip, the first clip, the gentleman's agreement between Solomon and the two slave traders who were, of course, unbeknownst to him at the time. And then his rude awakening in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, when he wakes up enslaved. And it's a very graphic, scary thing. Let's try it, please.
Where are these women folk here?
I love you, Solomon.
Hurry back, please.
See you in a few weeks.
All right.
Get out.
Hey there, Mr. Norton.
My. You fellows don't give up easily, do you?
Nope. No, we don't.
Well, come on in. Sit down. Well, what can I do for you, gentlemen?
We're businessmen, Mr. Northup. We're very sensitive to the needs of people. That's how we make our living, giving people what they need. And they need your music.
I don't know. My wife is away, and,
We can guarantee you'll be back before she has a chance to miss you. And if you come back with a lot of money in your pockets, she can't rightly get too mad now, can she? Well, do we have a deal?
yes. I'll accept your offer.
Congratulations. Well, we'll pick you up in the day after tomorrow, about 9 o'clock.
Right.
And we'll drink a toast to it tomorrow.
Won't do you no good to fight. Them chains made of iron.
What is this? Where am I? Graham? Hamilton? How I get into these chains?
Best you hush.
Where is this? Where am I?
You in Washington. This the pen. You're gonna be sold.
Sold?
So I want to wind down and just ask some questions about the future. We've dealt with the past and the present, and since there are some filmmakers in the house, I'd like to just share some brief thoughts. So what does the future hold? What are some aspects of this crime against humanity and the legacies it produced that remain to be given additional attention by filmmakers, videographers, and digital produces. I think I have not seen a film yet on the current impact on African countries. What is the impact of the slave trade on current contemporary Africa? We know that it obviously, colonialism flew right out of it because slavery was such a successful economic institution that the European powers could then follow through on slavery, on colonialism. So, but what is the impact on current? And what about on the United States and the Americas? What is the impact of slavery on the current predicament of people of African ancestry? Number 3, recognizing this relationship between past and present, how might filmmakers treat what I like to call retrospective justice, so vividly described by writer Ta-Nehisi Coates in his June 2014 Atlantic article, The Case for Reparations. I don't know how many people saw that, but it's a very important piece. And finally, what about making narrative films drawing on the memoirs of other enslaved Africans in order to expand the visual history of Africans in the Americas? For example, Harriet Jacobs or Frederick Douglass or Sojourner Truth, and a host of others, some of whom have been mentioned this evening. So the last statement I'd like to make is that what these filmmakers have done, Queen, Nyang, Gomes, Asante, Diallo, Medhondo, Emma Christopher, Roy Anderson, Haile, Marlon Riggs, Sergio Hidal, Gordon Parks, and others give us much hope for the future. New technology is shown by the success of the inexpensive DVD production in Nigeria, the so-called Nollywood, and elsewhere in the world, gives some hope at the possibilities of getting the visual message out for setting the record straight. And thank you, Haile, and the other filmmakers present for contributing to an important movement. And thank you, audience friends, for your attentive presence this evening as we collectively remember slavery. Thank you.